Well, hello and welcome to After the Sermon, a Bethany podcast where we have the privilege of digging deeper into our Sunday messages. I am Tami and today I'm joined by Pastor David Baxton and Pastor Steve Musto. But before we start, guys, I have a question for you. I was not well last week, so I was home on Sunday, and I get a text saying, there are protesters outside.
Oh, yeah.
Are we safe?
Yeah.
Can you fill me in? What happened? Let's talk about this and then put a bow, or put it to bed.
Yeah, put a bow on it. That's good because we're not going to talk about it on Sunday because Sunday worship service is for worshiping, and I don't want to give folly any time in the service. So. So there were, there's they're not a group. It's a man and his wife who travel from place to place, seemingly, and find churches, religious institutions, and other institutions that they can protest at. And, they will carry signs and... So they've been around. They were on. They happened to be on the UW La Crosse campus this week. From what I hear, I was talking with a pastor the other day that said that they were at his church last year and did a very similar thing. They come for a Sunday. They try to kind of egg you on, and do what they can. So they had a couple of points, and I basically addressed those on Sunday. So here's the thing. Here's what I would say about all of this. When stuff like this happens, we have this reaction of we want to shut it down and we want to not listen. We want to put our fingers in our ears, and it's like, well, these people are obviously nuts. That's how we feel. They dress funny. They look funny. They talk funny. They are saying things that are outrageous. It must not be from the Lord. But if you're a follower of Christ, you don't really have the option of just immediately cutting somebody off and saying, well, that's not true. That's not true. In fact, we're in the forgiveness series. So imagine, just put it in another, somebody comes to you and says, hey, what you said really hurt me. No, that's not true. That's not true. How do you know? Well, because it can't possibly be true. I don't like the way you came and asked me that. I don't like the outfit you're wearing. I don't like, well, that doesn't work that way. We have these warm thoughts of Elijah and Elisha and Jeremiah and John the Baptist. And do you really think you would have been friends with them? There's no way. Yeah. They wouldn't have had anything to do with us. They weren't interested in your friendship. We would have gone, what is going on with those people? Even for their day, they dressed weird and talked weird. People avoided them. We would have avoided them. So we don't have and in the moment on Sunday, and then for the next 24 hours, you don't really have the luxury of just saying, I refuse to listen to you because I don't like what you're doing and how you're doing it. Yeah. So we have to enter a discernment process where we say, I need to decide whether you're from the Lord or not. I need to decide whether God is telling you this. If you remember David fleeing from Absalom and he's leaving, it's like Shammai or somebody's on the other bank and yelling at him and calling down curses on his head. And so he's like, should we kill him? And David's like, no, because maybe God sent him to curse me. So look, if God sent him, you're going to be battling against God. So we have to have the humility to try to discern, what is this person saying? Is it true? Is it right? So in doing that, there's all kinds of theological tests and discernments you can make. But in this case, that really wasn't even necessary. And here's why. So I did not read whatever it was that they posted online about our church or about me. I didn't read it. But here's what I do know. That not, let me start here. Can the Spirit of God lie or be wrong? No. So the Spirit of God can't lead us astray. The Spirit of God always speaks truth. So a prophet, by any measure, Old Testament and New Testament, must speak truth. That's not just theological truth. That's all truth.
Okay.
When they are speaking for God, they know things. In fact, I just got done reading in my quiet time the story of Judah and Israel coming together for a battle, and the prophets all saying, "Oh, you guys are going to win. You're going to win. You're going to win." And then Micah the prophet comes in and says, "You're not going to win." And the other prophets are offended. And
the king is mad because Micah never says anything good.
And never says anything good about me. He's like, when I come back, I'm going to deal with you, Micah. And Micah says, "You come back, I'm not a prophet." Because what I'm telling you is true. This is like actually. So just in what I saw and heard, they got things wrong about whatever, our church, about me, about whatever it was. They factually got things wrong. They made wild assumptions about things that are not true. So right away, I say, that's not true. So I can shut the door on that. The other thing that we have to, the prophets would challenge you on your walk with God, and they would say hard things. John the Baptist called the Pharisees some tough names, but it had to do with their walk with God. So the names that this guy called me or whatever had to do with they don't offend me at all. But they also did some personal attacks. And in those personal attacks that had nothing to do with the Bible, in those personal attacks, it's like, wait a second. That's extra biblical. That's outside the bounds. And so again, I don't have to listen to you. And then if I decided to do a deep dive, I guess, into the theology of it, I could say, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. But with those two boxes, those are the first two boxes. Like with those boxes checked, like you didn't even get that right, I don't have to listen to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, for just to put everybody's mind at ease, the pattern has been that they then move on to whoever is next on their list. Yeah. So they probably won't be back. And if they do come back, we're now ready for that. But there you go.
Okay.
But we can bring that one to a close. Yeah. And now we have a story to tell.
Time. There were protesters outside of our building. So it is never boring at Bethany, or at least it hasn't been boring for a few weeks.
Could it be? Could we have maybe just a couple of weeks?
I'm hoping.
I'd really like that.
That would be good. All right. And then you decided you guys would do a series on forgiveness. And I am realizing there are a lot of questions happening.
Yeah.
Because we live in a world where we've been hurt. Maybe we've hurt, and people have not extended forgiveness to us in those situations. So right from the get-go, I think we just need to let our listening audience know we're just going to talk, and this is going to be a two-part series.
Yeah.
So week one.
Two-part podcast.
Podcast. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right. So let's dive in.
And want to add to that too, encourage people as we're going through this, this has been broken into 4 weeks. And week one, you have all your additional questions you might think about for this topic. We talked about this in my grow group, and I said, I want you to hold on to that one. Like
put a pin in
put a pin in it. Tammy knows one of my things. Yes. Put a pin in that. That's a great question. Yeah. And I even, knowing where we're going and, having studied this myself, I held back and said, let's not hit that yet. Let's wait. And then in next week or week 3 or week 4, we're going to come to that. And let's allow us to slowly walk these questions along with the bigger content of the messages. And so just for leaders and those listening right now to just know, it's a slower process, but it's a good slower process. Sit in it. Don't feel like you have to answer everything right away, and allow us to kind of walk through it. And hopefully we answer most of the questions through that process.
Yes.
So last week I wasn't here. You guys did a great job. It was fun to watch the podcast with you two on it. So you really just taught people, in the garden, the fall, this is why we need to forgive, because sin entered the world, and we violate one another, and we violate the Lord.
Yeah.
So this week, I think you're going to be spending a ton of time in Matthew 18.
Yeah.
And I've heard people upset because Matthew 18 has not been followed, or upset because Matthew 18 doesn't fit Matthew 18 seems to be hinge point for some people.
And it definitely is.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, a few weeks ago, there was some men's conference. There was some drama. It made the news.
Oh yeah.
One pastor called out another pastor, and the pastor who was being called out was in the crowd yelling Matthew 18, Matthew 18, and got up and said Matthew 18, Matthew 18. So
is it like a get out of jail free card? Like
that's good. We need to talk about that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit this week, because these are the words. Matthew 18 is Jesus speaking.
Yeah.
And so he's going to get what he's doing. That whole chapter is really about forgiveness, but what he's going to give us just in the brief passage that we're going to look at is something that is, it's a bit of a process, but even calling it a process or steps or anything can be a little too on the nose. So let's talk about it.
So if I read it, I'm going to start at 15. Where would you like me to end?
Why don't you end at 20?
Okay. If your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he won't listen, take 1 or 2 others with you, so that by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be established. If he doesn't pay attention to them, tell the church. If he doesn't pay attention even to the church, let him be like a Gentile and a tax collector to you. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you on earth agree about any matter that you pray for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there among them.
Yeah, and a lot of we know bits and pieces. So this is one of those passages that people quote bits and pieces out of.
Sure.
Right.
Like when we go to prayer, we do that.
Where 2 or more.
Lord, where 2 or 3 are gathered. It was like Jesus shows up as soon as 2 people walk into a room. Oh, Jesus is here. He just showed up. He wasn't here before, but now he's here.
Yes, he's not omnipresent.
Yeah.
Or anything.
I mean, it's about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So there's a lot here. So what Jesus gives us is essentially 4 steps to follow. So if there's sin that has been committed, the first step is to go to the person who has committed the sin and say, I want to show you this. I want to show you the error just between the 2 of us.
So, but even before we say 4 steps, these are 4 steps loosely for brothers and sisters.
Correct.
Not even if a non-believer were to offend us.
Right. I think they're still wise.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say they're still wise. So let's just unpack step 1 for just a moment, because where this gets violated mostly is in this. I offend David.
Yeah.
And David says, I'm offended, but he doesn't come to me. He goes to you. And he says, Steve offended me. And he might couch it under a different thing. Hey, will you pray for me about this? I'm really struggling with unforgiveness towards Steve. Well, now you know. So now he's triangulated. That's what it's called. Brought somebody else in. Or am I crazy, or is this offensive? Should I be offended by that? Well, what are we doing? We're before we've gone to step 1.
We're building our own case.
We're building. Yeah, we're like getting an army together. So if you haven't witnessed it, you don't have any business knowing it. So that's where he would, come directly to me. So that's the first step in this process, and that is in ideal situations, that is what we do.
Okay. Step 2, the person doesn't hear you.
So this gets interesting. So here's where some debate is. If the person doesn't hear you, you bring 2 or 3 witnesses.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does witness mean someone who's there to mediate, to make sure you're not mean to David? Does witness mean someone who actually saw what happened? Does witness mean I see, David is hurt or you are hurt, and so I'm witnessing the pain of the sin? What does witness mean?
Yeah, good. Go. You want to jump in?
Well, no, you go yours because I think
is it one of those things on the scale of orthodoxy? It can mean all the things, like
So the Greek word, the Greek word is evangelist. Evangelion, essentially. It's This is who is an evangelist? Is somebody outside the faith? Someone outside the faith can tell others about Jesus and who he is and can instruct us on the Bible and everything else, but that's not what an evangelist is. An evangelist is, my life has been changed by the Lord, and therefore let me tell you what God has done in me. Let me spread the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ.
So it doesn't mean you need to bring another believer.
I think the intent is for someone who has witnessed what has happened.
Okay.
Now there is room in there, and I want to talk about where there's room in there. But David, what were you?
Well, I mean, I think that's the room part. Is how do you get these really? I mean, a lot of offenses happen one-on-one.
Correct.
Right. That's the reality of it. And a lot of things aren't publicly done. And so how do you navigate and coming back to what we said, like the reason we go to someone else sometimes is I'm offended. Should I be offended? Like there's like, there may be legitimate, like I really it's still not necessarily the right way to do it, but there's maybe legitimate tension in that. And I think sometimes, a great way also to apply this. And I think when you go back to Deuteronomy, you can maybe see this a little bit in the second half of that section right there is let's bring someone in we both trust to walk this with us.
Yeah.
To have a conversation with us. We're both comfortable, like David, Tami, we've had this thing. I think Tammy's done this. Tammy's like, I'm struggling seeing this. I'm not sure I even did anything. You know what, Steve, will you come in and just process this with us? Like we want resolution because the whole point of Matthew 18 is to win someone over.
Correct.
You mean it's not so that I feel better in my offense?
Yeah, it is not to put it to the man that's caused my offense. It is to win each other over because we want to be in authentic community and relationship with each other. Like that's if the offended person, if that's not your goal, sit your butt down because you can't walk this process.
Yeah, well said.
Is it even deeper than authentic unity and relationship between us as brothers and sisters? Ultimately, if a brother has sinned, what is their relationship with the Lord like? Don't we want to restore them to fellowship with the Lord too, if they're walking in sin?
So sin is we have to remember that sin is egregious to God. So we live in a sin-scarred world. We see sin around us all the time. Relationships between brothers and sisters, it's like dancing on a very crowded dance floor. We're on a very crowded dance floor with each other. So there are going to be occasions when we bump into each other, when we step on each other's toes, when someone is talking too loudly. I mean, there's all kinds of things. If you've ever been on a crowded dance floor, you know the feeling. All of these offenses can take place. So in that scenario, in that situation, none of us should want to be the jerk on the dance floor. We should all be like, look, we're in this together and we're trying to move around each other and with one another and see each other and have conversation even while all this is going on and be in fellowship. And all right, that's what we should want. So if you're a follower of Jesus, let's start here. You should never, ever require anyone to get past step one. If you've sinned against a brother or a sister and that person comes to you and says, hey, I have this issue with you, and you are like, no, I'm sorry. I don't buy that. If they're having to come to you with other people, that should bug you probably more than it does. Because that means that if step one has been followed and we're at step two, this is an escalating scale of severity. And sin is not breaking your heart the way it needs to. Now, of course, in saying this, I'm assuming that the offense has actually taken place, that a sin has been committed, that someone has wounded someone else. So we need to deal with that. We need to be, when someone comes to us, our heart needs to break so so that we're not like, I don't buy that. I'm going to make somebody else come to me too and go to the next step because my ego can't handle the fact that I might have hurt your feelings. I hurt your feelings. I did.
Right.
Well, I think that's the piece is I think what makes forgiveness and this so complicated is this word sin, this idea of transgressions, this idea like we really want, we become lawyers once. If I go to Steve and I am so guilty of this, like full disclosure, like I am the lawyer, right? And,
you are a lawyer, but I've seen it be used for, it's not always bad. It's
no,
there's that one time it was used for good.
One time. No, it's good. I have seen people wrestling with their faith, and because you can help move them through seeing it logically, it's a good thing.
Yeah. So when we often turn to lawyers with sin, right? And, the heart that you're talking about, Steve, if I see you as my brother in Christ, even if I'm like, I don't think I did anything to Steve, like I bumped into him on the dance floor. It was an accident. Now you're like offended by me. Like I did something. I bumped you on the dance floor. I mean,
right.
But compassion toward my brother says, I want you to know, I wasn't trying to hurt you, but I'm so sorry it did hurt you.
Yes.
I didn't want to bump you. So I could still say, I may have not sinned. I really may have not sinned, but I can still offer apologies. I can still offer compassion. I can still offer for your pain, whatever. The truth is sometimes when we take offenses, we're the ones that actually are sinning.
Yeah.
I mean, like, right. We've seen that, but I've been reflecting on this more. I was talking with some people who emailed me, Tami and I actually with a question. And as I was processing this, they had in their small group was, if grace drives what we do, this becomes a lot less messy.
Yeah.
If my heart is grace toward the offender because they're broken, and I'm broken, and also this is the big piece, grace to the one struggling in their pain.
Yeah.
Because when grace enters that narrative with each other, and it's not ego anymore, it shifts we stop lawyering Matthew 18,
right,
and we start seeing as something that God has given us to help us find grace for each other, instead of a process of proving who is right or wrong.
It becomes a beautiful dance then. Yeah. I can think of kind of early in our relationship, you came into my office and I had said something that hurt you, and your heart was, I don't want this to cause a wall between us. And I was devastated and of course cried because I felt, so bad that I hurt you. And then you felt bad because you're like, well, now you feel worse than I felt. than I feel. But you didn't come in to rub my nose. You came in because you cared about us as brothers and sisters, and you didn't want to give Satan 1 ounce of room. And it was a beautiful thing. And I felt like the fact that you could be honest with me made our friendship even sweeter. That's Matthew 18, not I will be heard and someone will know that I was hurt. So
often, we talked about this a little bit last week, but so often these things are not the sins in the classic sense. We take offense to something, or it's a slight, or it's a subtle thing. I remember there are times when I've been in some pretty heated meetings and people have said things in the meetings, and in the moment it's almost appropriate in the meeting because of the tone of the meeting or the temperature of the meeting is high. But on occasion I've had to say something along the lines of, hey, let's go back. Let's just, for a second, let's stop. Because something just got said. And I think it probably had a little more force behind it than what you wanted to have behind it. So can we just go back to that for a second? Because what's going to happen is if we leave here, that's going to become the title, the narrative of the meeting. And that doesn't deserve to be the narrative of this meeting.
Right.
So let's go back and deal with that and make something else the title, so that we don't walk out here, well, that's the meeting where the guy said, we don't want to do that. So in the moment, if we can deal with these things, if we are bumping into each other, it's okay. So there's something here about, yes, there is sin involved. There is something has happened. A business deal has gone bad. I said I was going to do this for you. I didn't do that. whatever it is, something has happened here that's been an offense.
So we've really only done 2 steps at this point. You go to the person, they didn't hear you, you take someone with. I think I heard you say, really, it should be a witness that saw what happened.
Ideally. But it can't always be.
Right. Yeah. And then you said sometimes we need a mediator, someone that both of us trust. So that's going on. The person still is not listening.
Yeah.
Step next.
Yeah. So then it's go to the church. And this is open for wild interpretation.
Yes.
And here's why. The church is a different. So when Jesus is talking, he says ecclesia is the word he uses. Take it to the fellowship. The church doesn't even exist yet.
Right.
Would the church then look more like a grow group in one of our homes?
It was more that size.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have some leeway about how this is applied. And we have to be careful not to apply this rigidly.
So you don't make the young woman who's made a mistake and pregnant stand up in front of the church and confess her sin.
In every situation is so unique. It is, of course, my automatic answer is no.
Say no.
But when you start dealing with hypotheticals, I have made the mistake before of saying, well, absolutely not. And then I found out behind the scenes, it said there's something else going on.
Okay.
And so even that, and Jesus leaves us room for discernment and wisdom. So we need to be careful. Some of it has to do with where does the offense, who did the offense affect? Okay. And how wide ranging is it? So to some degree, the 3 of us are bad examples of this because a lot of what we do impacts huge numbers of people in the church.
Sure.
So if there is something that I do that is potentially disqualifying or whatever, it needs to be told to the church.
The whole body.
It must be told to everybody. But not
just because of your position.
Because of where I am. Yes. That's right. But that's not the case with most people. So there's a grow group is a great piece of that. But there's another, the elders are certainly, part of that too, depending on what the situation is. There have been situations in the past of business deals going bad. The elders have had to be brought in to that, like to help discern wisdom between 2 parties who have, business has failed or whatever, and one feels like they got cheated. So there are different ways, bringing the wisdom of the church to bear. It is not always going in front of the church and, proclaiming somebody's sin.
Okay.
Well, I think there's almost this picture here, and we see this sometimes almost with this idea of an intervention. Who comes to an intervention? How do you decide who should be? It's people that are either directly affected, but not just directly affected, that are in community. They're in relationships. So there's this thing happening. And I think you said it so well, Steve. If we finally got to this step, the only reason you ever get to this step is there is such a hard-hearted disregard to the damage that's occurring.
Yeah.
It's a pretty extreme situation. Yeah. This isn't like, well, we just disagree on something. Like there's a perpetual damage that's occurring because of this. And so you bring in those people that maybe have been multiple affected by the damage or witnessed that damage, and that and can also help resolve that damage.
Yeah.
Like there's this so much, because again, that's our goal. Our goal is resolution. Our goal is the person to feel restored in the relationship with God. Like you said, Tami, our relationship with each other. I mean, we're looking out for the good of this person.
Right.
Where this is so misapplied often is we're looking out for the good of me.
Yeah.
Because I'm upset.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just how you think about bringing this in. That intervention narrative, I think, can often help us because we consider the relationships and the impact and who can help make this better. Who can be trusted to make this better? Who could this person even trust to maybe listen to that they haven't heard from yet?
Yeah. There, on a number of occasions, when I've had to have hard conversations with people about something that was going to happen or something that has happened in their life, I have said to them, do you want to bring somebody in with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody who just knows you and loves you. And because, well, first of all, coming in is scary to talk to your pastor.
It's
It can
like
be
going
scary
to the
to people.
principal's office.
Yeah, it has that. I hate that it has that connotation, but I know for a lot of people it does. So I don't ever want people to feel like powered up on.
Yep.
So I will often say, is there somebody here? And oftentimes that person will be the one to say, hey, but hang on a second. You and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
We'll turn to that person and say in the midst of our meeting, you and I have talked about this a little bit. Do you hear what Steve is saying? Do you understand that? And they will bring
Clarity.
some clarity and peace to that situation. So there is, there's room for that. I think that's well said, David. The idea that who can help?
Yeah.
Who's really going to help? And what is the point? Let's go back to the point. The point is restoration.
Yes.
Always, always, always restoration. The point is restoration of relationship, restoration of fellowship, restoration of community. That's what we are going for. So what gives us the best possible chance of restoring this?
And I think this is also why some people avoid, we hit this a little bit last week, Steve, avoid fellowship, avoid community, because if I get into community, people are going to see, and these conversations will probably happen.
Right.
I mean, they've happened to all of us. All three of us have experienced this in community we've been in. Like, I didn't realize I even did that, but I did, and that's hard and those can be uncomfortable. Yeah. And so I think, and I've seen this too, where people now have entered a situation, they don't want to deal with it. They leave those fellowships.
Right.
They leave, truthfully, this is Jesus painting a picture for us of why fellowship and community outside of Sunday morning attendance of a church is essential to Christian living.
Yeah.
And yet we know a lot of people avoid that. I mean, we're at a big church.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that might even come to a church like Bethany to be in the crowd,
right,
and avoid the more intimacy or
to get away from the place that tried to hold them accountable.
Right. Yeah. That's true too. And we just, I think if there's anything, you might listen to this, like you're just one of those that you like sitting on the outside. I think it's worth asking that question. Why?
Yeah.
And I'm not just avoiding people. I'm really avoiding Jesus.
Yeah.
Because the point is, when you come to this very end, is we're bringing Jesus into this process when we really are doing it right. And if I'm avoiding Jesus, that can't possibly be good for my relationship.
I would say 90% of the time, when you get to this third step, the person, probably 95% of the time, the person leaves the church.
Yeah.
They just leave.
Yeah, they just leave.
I'm not going to do this anymore.
Okay.
And I'll leave. And they may cast it as a moral imperative. I will not be talked to this way.
Yeah.
Which again tells you a lot about,
So I know you want us, I know you're going to be challenging us on Sunday not to see it as this magic formula.
Yep.
And it's so hard to say steps because steps is probably not the right word, but we need to talk about something for step four.
Step four. So let's talk about it.
Okay.
So step 4 is treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So traditionally, a lot of churches have said, well, that means that we kick you out of fellowship. We excommunicate you from the church. Okay. I understand. And again, Jesus leaves us wiggle room. I understand that there are things that can happen whereby someone is no longer welcome in that community for a variety of reasons. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any.
But can you give me one?
Yeah, I think there are some.
Okay.
I know of a couple. I got to be careful what I say, but I know of a couple. However, let's go back to Jesus. What did Jesus do with tax collectors and pagans?
Well, he ate with them.
There you go.
Spent time with them.
So I think that our takeaway here, what Jesus would have us do, would be that if we can't have restoration together as brothers or sisters, then I have to treat you as an unbeliever. If you won't acknowledge this, I treat you as an unbeliever. So what does that mean? That means more grace or less grace? More grace. I flavor my conversations with you differently. Doesn't mean I avoid you. We're not to avoid unbelievers. We're to invest in unbelievers. We're to be strategic in our relationships with unbelievers. We are to be careful with them, what we say and how we say. It is to no longer assume that they have the privileges of being a brother or a sister in Christ. They're not a part of that anymore. And so there is the people who are in my life who are not yet followers of Christ, there's I can be somewhat intimate with them, but there's an arm's length to our relationship where they can't enter into what's really going on in my heart and in my soul because they don't have my Jesus.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because at first I'm thinking, well, man, if I don't confess my sin and now you're going to have all the grace in the world for me, why wouldn't I want to stay in that spot? Just be nice to me. Don't challenge me. I'm not your sister. But the second half of that is that there isn't that sweetness of depth and heart connection and relationships that we have with brothers and sisters. Okay.
But I think there's also, there's like this, you did this thing and we didn't resolve this thing versus this thing keeps happening. You know, often we get in these situations, when something escalates, it's usually not this one thing occurred. Sometimes it is, but usually there's this escalation. And I think that's where, we have to look at and consider what is the damage this is causing to the fellowship, to the community. So I may treat them like an unbeliever, but I have to put up protection and boundaries in how that might function, within what we share and what we talk about, the privileges of the intimacy and the relationships, that do matter. And we have other guidance in scripture that guides us to those situations as well.
So as you're talking, my brain always thinks in analogies, and unfortunately it always has to do with families because that's, where I live. But I'm thinking about all of the young women in my life I love, and the phone rings and I want to have a relationship with them. But when it's my children, when it's my family, I answer the phone faster. And so if we're not treating that person like a brother or a sister, there isn't going to be the same urgency for the relationship. Does that make sense at all, that analogy? Does it work for you guys?
You don't participate in the life of the church in the same way. I mean, there are a number of, a number of pieces to that.
Okay.
And I think there's an element of when you are part of something, you're no longer a part of it. There is a natural, and I think it's by God's design too. And we see this again in some of Paul's instructions. I should feel that tension. I should, as someone that is refusing to let my fellowship speak to me, I should feel a tension of broken fellowship. We love outsiders. Steve, you've said this a few times, but they're still outsiders.
Right.
When we say on a Sunday morning, if you're not a follower of Christ, please don't take communion. You're welcome here, but we're saying something that's still going to distinguish someone feeling like an outsider.
Correct.
Why they're an outsider? Because they are not choosing to join with us at the level of obedience and surrender to following Christ that the rest of us are choosing. Yeah. And so, yes, there's a ton of grace, but someone's going to feel like an outsider in that, and that's a natural part of it as well, because we want to sit in that tension.
Yeah. And the reason for doing that is so that they will miss and want to have that fellowship. It's not to punish. It's, okay.
Yeah, well said. Yep.
Okay. All right. I wanted to do this in the beginning, but I think we probably should have you or me read the definition of forgiveness, because there's a lot of questions going on here right now. So forgiveness is the release on the part of the offended party, the expectation that the debt will be repaid or that an offender will receive punishment. So we've just gone through these 4 steps.
Yeah.
Okay. No one has asked for forgiveness, but I am treating them as not my brother. Can I not forgive them?
Ooh. We will talk about that in part 2.
In part 2? Okay, all right.
Part 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.